Hello and welcome to our podcast. I'm Jonna Monahan from Women's Platform. What we're trying in our podcast is to hear experiences from people working on these issues and how we can relate this closely to people's everyday lives. And this is our first podcast in the series, and I'm delighted to have with me Olivia Potter-Hughes from Northern Ireland Human Rights Consortium.
Hello.
And Aslihan Tekin, who is a human rights lawyer based in Brussels.
Hello, everyone.
What we're really interested in today is why do human rights matter? So that is the first question. In your view, how important are international human rights and why? Maybe Aslihan, you want to start.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good and very big question. As an activist and human rights, advocate, I can say from the textbooks we have learned, human rights are inherent, inalienable, and they apply equally to all individuals. We emphasize here dignity and freedom for all. But this is when we talk about people, then we come to the states. States have legal obligations to protect, respect, and fulfill all these rights to be realized through international treaties, conventions, but also it comes to the national legislation. It comes back to, people back again. I mean, as an advocate for human rights and gender equality in the bigger framework, I would say human rights empower people. So international human rights, why important? Because they empower us. They give us the tools to, stand up for our rights. They gave us the tools to exist within a justice system. So we are the ones who create the system. So we become the people. We become the people who create the system. But I should also emphasize, when you ask why, it is also important to see rights are never given, they are taken. So there is always a struggle, there is always a conflict within the historical framework of the international human rights development. We see there have been wars, there have been conflicts in the societies between countries, and then this international human rights framework finally emerged because of people's demands, because people wanted to protect their lives, their right to live, right to exist, right to freedom of expression. Within this evolution of rights, we have started like with the first generation. We call them three generations first. The first generation was about, civil and political rights. It's about, liberté, liberty. And then it comes to égalité. Then it is called the second generation of rights. It's economic, social, and cultural rights. So this is how our societies are starting to, shape and understand what has been not given. So we have to take from the system. So we started to evolve within these generations. The third generation was followed with solidarity, and we call it like the group rights. We call it like fraternité. It is very important to see how our societies, how our global village has been changing, and how this international human rights framework is in parallel to is changing. And now at this age, we are talking about the fourth generation of rights, which is digitalization, how human rights will be protected when this technological innovation is taking place, how we will be protecting ourselves with the new changing global context. So it is very important to see how our daily fight for freedom, fight for rights is actually aligned with the global tendencies. This is how our society is transforming. It is also maybe a hint here that we cannot really separate international human rights growth and importance from other fundamental changes in our society.
I think that international human rights are an essential representation of our shared understanding of mutual humanity. If you look at the origins after World Wars, where the international human rights frameworks came from, it came from that recognition that we are all humans and we all deserve a certain standard of life and to not be abused and mistreated. The frameworks and having international human rights incorporated into domestic law provides a floor through which people should not fall. It provides a safety net in society. So on the one hand, there's the protective sort of element in a day-to-day life for people to make sure that things don't go terribly wrong and you're left with no approach to get yourself out of that situation or to have certain expectations of standards of how you're going to be treated. But on the other side, we have a vision for how society can be improved and how we, beyond borders and beyond political context, can all improve our shared experience in life and create a sort of better future and better society for us all. So I think there's that understanding of the protections and why they're important, and just because certain life experiences that you might have might not make every sort of specific right for certain demographics and lived experience seem that relevant. But as soon as you encounter someone who does live those kinds of experiences and see that those protections are necessary, it's easier to understand that. And then also to see that the tide rises and it takes us all up. Like giving additional rights to people like in the LGBTQI plus community doesn't take away from the rights that anyone else has or take anything away from them. It actually makes society better for us all. Changing standards of accessibility so that more disabled people can participate in education and work and life doesn't take anything away from other people. It just makes our society better because it's richer, because more people have access to engage with it. So I think there's the sort of one side of our understanding of human rights, and then there's something sort of bigger than that and a shared vision. And I find that inspiring, and that's why I like working in this area.
I think that's a very clear message that you can't take people's rights away and that they are that bottom floor. My next question will be around how do you see human rights take shape in everyday life? But just before then, I was very interested, Aslihan, you're talking about connecting different issues and frameworks. Just thinking about women's rights, for example, they are very closely linked to issues about climate change, conflict, migration. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
When we call international, it is not only about, this intergovernmental structures like UN, but also we have the regional structures, like the European Union, Council of Europe, and also this Latin American and African structures too. So it is very important to see we are in this big village of organizations as well, and they are very much connected to itself. So why I say this about this connection, like when you have this every global challenges that we have been talking about, it can be climate change, as you have mentioned, it's the refugee crisis we have been living, for a long time. We are always in this war, state of war with, Russia's war on Ukraine, what's happening in Gaza. These are, big issues that are affecting everyone. So it is very important to see how we are connecting the dots for each other within this international framework. So for example, as you have mentioned, the women's rights, climate change, digitalization, refugees, they are all interconnected, of course. This year we are going to, I say this year, but it is actually next year, the Beijing Plus 30, where it is where we talk about the Beijing platform for action. And we're going to assess where we are with the women's rights and how states are, reply to their commitments and so forth. But this includes now the climate change, because women are not only those who are affected by climate change, because they are mostly at the rural areas, at the forefront with the agribusiness and so forth. But it's also because they are less represented when this is the climate changes in discussions, because it's about participation. Then we come to the first, one of the first group of rights that we talked about, political rights, women's participation, women's existence. The new thing emerges, climate change emerges, and then women are not there. Women are not there to discuss as equals. So it is very important how we see all these things are, affected. Refugee crisis, okay, refugee crisis, and how far the state responses are discussed, how far the money are, which country is going to do what, but what is the situation of LGBTI, community within the refugee camps? What is the situation of women and girl child, situation, disabled refugees? As Olivia was rightfully mentioning, when things emerge, they are not emerged within themselves closely, but they create their own groups of, right holders as well. So we are not only subjects to the topics, but we are those who create the channels to bring the solution to those challenges. So everything is connected. Digitalization. But right now at the European Union, we are now discussing for example, for a new commission. And in this new commission, women are not represented as equal numbers. But it's not about the numbers. It is about, of course, the quality. But it is very important to see how the European Parliament is represented equally. By gender, but also how inclusive they are with this other segments, refugee, how far the migrant women are represented at the European Parliament, how far the disabled are represented in the European Parliament. There are so many questions, because these people are going to reshape our framework within the next challenges for climate change, bigger portfolio of security and defense. And where are women? Where are the, all those less represented when those policies are shaped?
I think going back to that idea of transcending political and historical context, because of the complex nature of Northern Ireland's past. In the peace process, in the Good Friday Agreement, one of the promises that was made was for a Bill of Rights for Northern Ireland that would domestically incorporate the international human rights framework into law here, and sort of given all of the complexities of that and people's different relationships and perspectives on how much they could rely on and trust the government here to protect them and their rights. That is an essential thing to install trust in society here and trust in our government. It has not actually been fulfilled as of yet. So part of the work that I do is the campaign for a Bill of Rights for Northern Ireland called the Make Your Future Fair campaign. And we're trying to get that promise fulfilled. But the reason that that's important is just because the UK government or any government has ratified and signed up to one of the UN treaties doesn't actually mean that they're doing anything about it, or that it's actually part of the law or considered in any way, shape, or form in any of the policies that they put forward or any decisions that they make or anything that they do, as is evidenced in sort of some of the most recent pieces of progress and change here in Northern Ireland, like getting marriage equality pushed through and getting abortion reform. But there's so many different things and human rights standards. There are massive gaps where people are being terribly mistreated and left behind, like thinking about things like trans healthcare, access to education for children with special educational needs, disabled people's ability to participate in society. Just because they've signed up to something saying like, that sounds nice, we like that idea, doesn't mean they're doing anything about it. So we need it to actually put concretely into law so that we have an access avenue by which to hold them to account and to challenge the fact that that's not being done. So if people's rights are being abused and they're being mistreated, they can have like legal redress and they have action to take on that, which is an empowerment for people in their everyday lives. So that is the focus of work for a lot of organisations broadly in the human rights sector in Northern Ireland. They might be working individually on specific pieces of the international human rights framework, like working with women or working with different communities, but we share this vision of that domestic incorporation as something that we can all work together to literally make our future more fair for everyone within society.
Yeah, and I think that's something that is really important. However frustrating it is to point out that human rights are only as strong as we make them. So there are processes through the UN to monitor progress of all countries, and countries get recommendations. But the focus is really on us as civil society a lot of time to carry that forward. So I suppose this is my final but probably most important question. How do you think we can talk about human rights better and keep this on the agenda so that we can move closer to rights-based decision making?
I think from every angle, from education to from healthcare, from our whoever you are, from your daily, struggle, be it as an NGO, you don't necessarily have to be an advocate for human rights like we are, because it is my daily life. So I know what I'm going to do every day. This is I'm committed to this. But as everyone, for each one of us, we have our daily struggles. And when you go to the bank to look at the monthly slip, you just have a look at how much you are paid. And if you're a woman and if you're a man, that payment is not the same. This is why we are fighting for equal pay for equal work. So it is for everything, for education, access to gender sensitive education, access to healthcare, access to water and sanitation. It really depends where you are and who you are and how you really realize how your daily all actions actually refer to a right that you already maybe have that right because you are not aware of it, but you are maybe not aware of the violations you face because you don't really think about it. But things are changing in the society that I hinted through the digitalization, innovation, and tech. So through that, even people are not talking about digital literacy. When we talk about digital violence, we try to protect each other. Also, we give the emphasis for children online, how we can protect the space for children. It is very important, yes, indeed. So it is about acknowledging, it's about the recognition of your rights. I think what we can do when you come to this, it is, I think, going to very basics. It is literacy. I call it literacy of rights. I mean, we need to let anyone be aware that they have rights and they have to actually advocate for and actually be the ambassadors of what we are doing in their daily life. And it is actually a nourishing atmosphere we are in right now. Even things are going obviously into far right in certain politics, It really shrinks the space for NGOs. It really shrinks the space, the air we breathe in is shrinking for human rights activists, women's rights activists, for LGBTI, anti-far right rise is very dangerous. So it is very important to recognize that. But on the other hand, there's a growing solidarity. Now it is, when we talk about this generations of rights at the beginning I mentioned, we have the waves of feminism, we have the waves of, growing understanding of how we can collaborate better.
I completely agree with everything that was said. And I think that sort of in the sector of rights being under attack, it can be very difficult to find the space to open up to engage more people in discussions in human rights when you're sort of constantly firefighting and you're just trying to protect what you've got. So there is maybe opportunity in that collective action to engage new audiences in the discussion. But I think one thing that's quite important is for us to sort of reclaim the language of rights and to not be afraid of discussing things in terms of rights, because there is a very good job being done by the far right and by the media to put rights and rights-based language and intersectionality and all of the things that we've been talking about today into this context of culture war and wokeism, and it is making even like politicians that we would engage with and political parties who are on side with sort of different reforms and would be quietly supportive, afraid to say that in public spaces and to engage with it. And as was said before, it's everything from when you look at your bank statement, what you see when you step out your door in the morning, like everything is based in rights and what we have access to. So whether people have an understanding of that or not, it is relevant to every aspect of our lives. And we have a responsibility, I think, to make people see that and relate to it and sort of bring it down to an everyday level. And part of that is not being afraid to talk about it and to engage in those conversations. And I think it's really important as well to remind people that just because some people frame things like, if you look at some of the migration decisions that have happened in the UK recently, where different groups and communities are villainised and abused and targeted, and people think that asylum seekers having access to somewhere to live while they're going through their claim takes something away from them. Like, that is a terrible lie that is being communicated in society. And we have a responsibility to make sure people realise that protecting anyone and everyone protects us all, and it makes life better for everyone, and we are all like sharing this experience and this fight together. So I think there's a lot of work to do, and there's like a lot of narratives to be challenged, but I do believe as well that there is a global community that is coming together, that is engaging in these conversations, and that's exciting to see. And I think it can seem a bit like there's no end in sight, but I do think we are going in some very positive directions, and things like this and trying to engage with people and new audiences and sort of bringing activists into people's lives to let them hear about different experiences is one of the ways that we can make that change. Oh, and we also need to be better about sharing and celebrating the wins that we do have. There is so much incredible work being done, like here in Northern Ireland and across the world, by activists and by rights advocates, and it's platforming those as well and celebrating the wins and taking a moment to stop fighting fires and have a little celebration every now and again. Wouldn't hurt.
And that is part of what we're trying to do with this podcast. The challenges are very real, but I think you're setting out the hope, and that's what keeps us motivated. So thank you so much to both of you, Olivia and Aslihan, for joining us today. And thank you for listening. Our next episode will look at human rights in the context of violence against women specifically. Bye.
Thank you.